Hello, dear students. Today we are going to start with our new chapter, Chapter 9, The Living Organisms and its Characteristics and Habitats. So, dear students, we are going to learn in this chapter more about the living organisms. In today's class, we will be learning about the introduction. So, before we start with the chapter, we shall see what we are going to learn in this chapter. The objectives in this chapter first will be the introduction, variety of organisms, habitat, components of habitat, terrestrial habitat, aquatic habitat, living things around us. So, these are the topics which we are going to cover in this chapter. Today is the introduction part. The term organisms, or what do you mean by the organisms? What do you understand by the term organism? Organism gives us the thought of the huge variety of living as well as non-living thing that we see around us. Now, the term organism or the term living organism mostly speak about the huge variety of living things around us. The living things can be huge animals such as lion, tiger, elephant, or it could be any tiny organisms like bacteria, worms, insects, and so on. Living organisms exist in huge variety in sizes, huge variety in forms, and many different places, as well as some of them might be huge or some of them might be very huge or some of them might be small or they might live in forest or any kind of places. So, dear students, some animals live in forest or they live in certain places. So, animals, tigers, they all live in forest. Whereas if you compare and if you think the official or the aquatic plants that they live in water, they might live in air. For example, birds spend most of their time in air while others might live in soil. They exist the huge range of organisms, insects, tiny worms, the earthworm. The best example is about the earthworm. They live in the soil, right? So there are so many creatures who live in the soil. There are so many creatures who live in the air. There are so many creatures who live in water, and so on. When they talk about the organisms, rather we talk about the living organisms, we can find a lot of them in our vicinity as well as. So in fact, if you go to your garden, you can find a lot of them in the garden itself. Let us look at different organisms that we see in our surroundings. Now, before we move ahead to some external surroundings, let us think about our houses. Even inside our house, no matter how much you keep it clean, you keep your house, you tend to find some other organisms. Of course, we are ourselves living organisms, but beside us, we also see the creature. For example, a common organism which we see in our houses, that we think of mosquito, spider, lizard, and so on. So these are the common insects which stays inside our house. You think mosquito bites cells and gives us the real pain. So mosquitoes, lizards, spiders are all the organisms which are seen in very near vicinity. So, dear students, they have seen inside our houses. So, not only if you think about the external surrounding, if you go out of the houses, you try to visit the forest and see huge number of trees, and that is in different ranges, you see trees, you see stream, you see many other things, you see you see many things, and you see many animals, right? You might have not gone inside the forest, but in television you would have seen the forest, right? Yes. So, dear students, where do you find these tiny insects or tiny things? We see all these lizards, spiders, mosquitoes around us when anything bad kept in that particular place. Lizards, we find it on walls. Spiders, we find it on walls, on the corners of the walls. And the mosquitoes, we find if something bad is kept, or something when something that is kept for more number of days, and mosquitoes flies around that. So these are the things where we see the living things in our houses. So when you look at a house, you might see furniture, television, refrigerator, dining table, sofa, etc. But in that environment, in which environment? In forest, could you see all these or some other organisms like deserts, spiders, enormous creatures? Now, when you go to the forest, you see full of trees, greeneries everywhere. Now, this is a huge abundance of the trees and water in huge number of animals and God survive. So, dear students, this is our house. This we stay in the houses, whereas the animals stay in the forest. So, in the forest, we see many greenery stuff, right? Yes, and there is huge number of water for huge number of animals, as well as the gods survive. There are so many huge animals like elephants, lions, tigers, giraffe. So, some have smaller animals like deer or goats, monkeys. They have very tiny. You have very tiny organisms like insects, worms, birds. So you see huge variety of living organisms. And the first again, if you go to some other type of surrounding, maybe the desert, what would you see? In a desert, so there are environment in quite different or climatic condition. The quite different than what it is in the forest. So in the forest we see huge number of trees, whereas you go to desert, you do not see any trees. You see more of sand, you see less number of trees and more of sand, right? It does not have any kind of soil, therefore it does not support the growth of plant. However, you see some plants like cactus which can grow easily, right? Yes. Why is that so? Because in desert there are very less number of water, and cactus do not need more water. It do not need more water to grow. And why do camels be in desert most of the? Because camels also does not need more amount of water. They can survive without water for 10 to 14 days. Yes, camels can stay without water for 10 to 14 days. So, plants like cactus are being grown easily because there are certain special plants which can grow even with less amount of water. So, those types of plants that are seen in desert. So, anyways, there are the number of plants and very less of water. In result, if we look at the climatic condition, they have very hot and dry days, but in very cold at night. At the end of living organisms, we see there are like camels and cactus plants. Now all the living beings who can survive with less water, who can survive with extreme heat, and who can survive with extreme cold night. So only those organisms will be able to live in heat and that kind of epic conditions. So therefore we see many different set of organisms that can cost. When you look at the polar region, how is the polar region? The polar regions are those who are the topmost and the bottommost region. There are two top, there are basically polar regions, and they are extremely cold. There are that is better covered with snow. They are covered with snow throughout the year. It is always covered with snow. So, who lives there? Do you think all living beings are capable to survive in that cold? No, of course not. So, which creature or which living organism stays there? The polar bear stays there. The polar bear, the penguin stays there. So, in human beings, uh, we cannot survive with extreme cold. We feel very cold. When we feel very cold, we wear jackets, sweaters, uh, caps, and etc. But the temperature keeps decreasing during the winter season. In polar region, it keeps decreasing during the winter season. What happens when it difficult for adaptation in decreasing temperature? That we will be seeing in the next part of the chapter. That we will be learning in detail about the adaptations in the next part of the chapter. So now, when you think of the organisms, can you stay for a longer time in that cold region? No, we cannot stay. We can stay only for few days, not more than few days. So when you look at the sea ocean, you see many underwater creatures like sharks, whales, starfish, jellyfish. These all stay in water. There are huge number of living organisms, whether you talk about the fishes, small fish, big fish, or any kind of aquatic plants. There are many types of aquatic plants who grow in underwater. So these are the tiny organisms or huge variety of living organisms and the tiny organisms. These are the things which we are going to learn in our further classes. So in the next class, we will be learning about the habitat and the adaptations. So let us continue this session in the next class. Thank you, class. Enjoy learning.